They say that to hear the whispers of the warp is to invite madness. But for some, there is no choice. The Sanctioned Psyker is born damned, a vessel of the Immaterium's hunger, cursed to feel what no human should. To serve the Imperium as a Psyker is not a calling. It is a sentence. From the moment of birth, their eyes mark them as different. Their minds a flickering beacon to the things that lurk beyond reality. And yet, in the grim darkness of the far future, their curse becomes a tool, a weapon turned against the very nightmares that created it. Bound in chains of golden faith, these broken souls march alongside the Astra Militarum, whispering prayers between screams, their minds burning to keep the galaxy from falling into shadow. If the Emperor is humanity's light, then the Psykers are the candles, flickering, fragile, and destined to burn out. If this story grips you, if you can hear the echo of the warp behind these words, then stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, for what follows is the untold life of those who carry the Emperor's burden upon their fractured minds. Every click is another voice joining the choir of the Imperium, lending strength to the flame that keeps the darkness at bay. They say every world under the Imperium holds its own kind of fear, but none is as quiet or as persistent as the dread of a child who dreams too vividly. On the Hive world of Caltrix Prime, under a sky perpetually grey with industrial ash, a mother wakes to the sound of her infant whispering words that no mortal tongue should know. The air around the cradle trembles. The walls pulse with something unseen. The child's eyes are clouded white, reflecting nothing, yet everything. The warp stirs, drawn to that spark of potential. And though the mother does not understand what she sees, some ancient instinct buried deep in human blood tells her, this soul is wrong. Days turn into weeks. Objects move without touch. Stray thoughts echo aloud. The neighbors murmur prayers to the Emperor and avert their gaze when the family walks past. The local priest visits, chanting benedictions that only seem to make the air heavier. The father begins to drink more. The mother hides her child during the night, clutching him close and whispering desperate pleas for silence. But the warp does not grant mercy. In the child's dreams, something answers. A presence vast and unknowable, crooning lullabies in languages made of light and static. When the black ship comes, it does not announce itself. It glides into orbit, an obsidian monolith whose presence is felt more than seen. Administratum clerks appear at the settlement's edge, bearing sigils of the Inquisition. A census is taken. The child's name is recorded. Within hours, soldiers in dull grey armor arrive to collect the offering. No resistance, no screams, just resignation. Every world knows this ritual. Every family prays it will pass them by. The mother kisses her son once, leaving a streak of ash on his cheek. When she looks up, he is already gone, swallowed by the procession. Aboard the transport shuttle, dozens of others sit in silence. Boys, girls, old men whose powers awaken too late, and women whose eyes flicker with unnatural light. The air is thick with fear, and through it runs a hum like distant thunder. Somewhere deep within the ship's hull, a containment field struggles to hold back the collective terror. Among them, the child opens his eyes again and whispers a single word he does not understand. Terror. The black ship moved without sound, an obsidian wound against the stars. Inside, silence was a mercy seldom granted. The air reeked of fear and disinfectant. The dim corridors thrummed with caged power. Those who had been taken, the Psykers-to-be, sat in rows, shackled in restraint fields that hummed softly with suppressive energy. Each prisoner was watched by a hooded attendant of the Scholastia Psychona, their faces hidden behind bronze masks etched with the sigils of warding. Their task was not compassion, it was containment. For days, the vessel drifted between worlds, gathering its harvest. On every stop, new captives were added, and fewer words were spoken. The corridors became crowded with trembling humanity, thousands of souls, each one a potential weapon or catastrophe. Some wept silently, others prayed, their prayers turning to screams when invisible hands tore through their minds. Every hour, a scream would rise from the isolation chambers, a reminder that not all made the journey. Some simply vanished, consumed by the entities that lingered just beyond perception, drawn to this ship full of untethered minds like carrion to blood. Guards whispered that each of these vessels carried an inquisitorial presence, a sanctioned witchfinder whose gaze alone could snuff a thought before it formed. Rumors spread in hushed tones. that the Inquisitor could hear lies as clearly as screams, that they could burn heresy from a soul before a word escaped its lips. No one had ever seen them, only felt the weight of their will pressing down like the hand of a god. The child, now a young boy among hundreds, felt the press of that power each time he dared to think. When he slept, the dreams came, twisted landscapes of fire and glass, where the air sang in maddening chords and unseen shapes whispered promises of power. He woke each time with blood trickling from his nose, his restraints vibrating with psychic feedback. One night, he heard a voice through the walls, not from the warp, but human, fragile, close. A woman prayed to the Emperor, her voice trembling. "Guide us through the darkness, O Master of mankind. Keep our souls from the hungering void." Her prayer was answered by nothing but static and the faint hum of machinery. Yet the boy felt a strange warmth stir within him, a spark of something he could not name, perhaps faith, perhaps delusion. When the black ship finally turned toward Terra, the stars outside warped into long ribbons of light. Every prisoner felt it, that shift, that hum of the warp pressing against the ship's shields. The attendants tightened their restraints, their own prayers becoming louder, faster. Somewhere deep in the vessel, a siren blared. One containment field had failed. For 3 seconds, reality screamed. A rift opened, and then silence. When the lights returned, one section of the ship was gone. Nothing but a molten scar and whispers that would never fade. The boy closed his eyes and dreamed again, this time of a golden figure standing on a mountain of fire. The black ship continued on, its harvest of souls bound for judgment. Sleep aboard the black ship was not rest, it was surrender. When the restraints hummed softly and the lights dimmed, the Psykers would drift into a collective half-consciousness, their dreams stitched together by threads of the warp itself. Within those dreams, they saw oceans of golden light, fractal cities made of thought, and a throne that pulsed like a dying sun. For many it was madness, for a rare few, it was revelation. The boy's dreams were different. He saw a figure of light standing on a plain of ash, neither man nor god, but both. The figure spoke without words, its presence flooding his mind with unbearable warmth and sorrow. The child tried to move closer, but each step made the light dim, until only darkness remained. Then came the whispers, countless voices, weeping, begging for release. When he woke, he found his restraints burned with fresh sigils, glowing faintly from psychic discharge. The attendants tightened them wordlessly. The voyage to Terra lasted months. Time lost meaning within the ship's hull. Meals came as tasteless rations. Light cycles blurred. Reality felt thin. Each day, another prisoner was taken away, chosen for evaluation. None returned. The guards never explained, but every survivor knew. The ones who vanished had failed their unspoken test. Sometimes, a faint golden hum filled the ship, and even the attendants would fall silent in reverence. It was said to be the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that guided the fleets of humanity, the Emperor's will made manifest. For a moment, all aboard could feel it, a presence vast and terrible, pressing upon their souls like the weight of eternity. Some cried, others screamed, a few simply smiled, hollow and empty, as if they had glimpsed peace for the first time. When Terra finally appeared through the viewport, a radiant marble of gold and storm cloud, the prisoners stirred. The boy gazed upon it and felt both awe and dread. The whispers in his head grew louder, singing hymns in 1,000 tongues. Somewhere deep within him, a fragment of understanding took root. He was not going to Terra for salvation. He was going there to be unmade. The black ship descended through the crimson haze of Terra's polluted sky, guided by unseen machines. Beneath its hull stretched the endless sprawl of the Imperium's heart, the city world where billions toiled in eternal worship. And far beyond, atop the gleaming mountain of the Imperial Palace, something vast and eternal waited. As the boy was led down the ramp, blinded by the holy light of the throne's distant glow, he felt the first tendrils of fate wrap tightly around his soul. The air vibrated with a low, ceaseless hum, the sound of 10,000 Psykers chanting prayers to keep the galaxy alight. He did not yet know that he was already one of them. The black ship drifted into the shadow of Terra like a speck of dust before a dying sun. From orbit, the world below looked less like a planet and more like a single breathing organism, a mass of metal, spires, and unending devotion. To the Psykers within, however, the sight was not salvation, but the threshold of judgment. Terror was not a homecoming, it was a furnace. The air inside the ship changed as it approached orbit, thicker, heavier, laced with the scent of oil and sanctified incense. The hum of the containment fields deepened into a bass thrum that set teeth on edge. The attendants moved with renewed precision, their steps rhythmic, ceremonial. They whispered litanies as they checked the restraints, each prayer both a plea and a warning. The boy, now pale and gaunt, listened to them speak words that sounded like iron scraping against stone. Through pain, we purify. Through sacrifice, we serve. As the ship docked with one of the orbital bastions of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the corridors flooded with light, blinding and pure. Columns of robed figures awaited them. Psyker overseers, silent servitors, and custodian wardens whose golden armor gleamed with menace. The prisoners were led out in single file, heads bowed, wrists bound in glowing manacles that hissed faintly with psychic energy. To look up was forbidden. To speak was heresy. The boy obeyed, though his mind whispered questions he dared not voice. They marched through kilometers of corridors, descending ever deeper into the bastion's heart. The air grew colder, thinner, more sterile. In the distance, he could hear chanting, not the soft prayers of priests, but the resonant, unified drone of thousands of voices raised in psychic synchronization. Every step closer made his skin crawl, his heartbeat syncopating with that dreadful rhythm. The walls themselves seemed alive, lined with sigils that pulsed faintly in response to unseen currents. Eventually, they were brought into what could only be called a holding sanctum. Rows upon rows of containment cells stretched into the darkness, each one sealed by a field of shimmering light. The occupants inside were barely human, twisted by psychic feedback, some little more than shadows of flesh and bone. Others whispered nonsense, their words forming invisible shapes in the air. The attendants referred to them as failures. The boy was pushed into one of the cells, the barrier flared to life, humming faintly. For a moment, the pressure in his skull lifted, the suppressors dampening the constant roar of the warp. He exhaled, trembling, the silence around him deafening after months of shared madness aboard the ship. And yet, in that silence, he felt it, the thin veil between reality and the immaterial, weaker here than anywhere else he'd known. Outside, a procession of acolytes moved between the rows, checking data slates and chanting designations. For every name spoken, another light flickered out. The culling had begun. He curled into the corner of his cell, staring at his trembling hands. For the first time, he wondered what sin he had committed before birth to deserve this fate. But in the warp, there are no innocent souls, only those not yet claimed. And somewhere, beyond the walls of his cell, the Emperor's servants prepared for the next phase of judgment, the trial of sanction. They came for him in the quiet hours, though on Terra, there were no true hours, only the endless mechanical heartbeat of the Imperium's machinery. 2 attendants in ash-grey robes entered the sanctum, flanked by a custodian whose armor caught the torchlight and turned it to gold. No words were spoken, no explanation offered. The boy's cell deactivated with a faint hiss, and he was led away. The other prisoners watched in silence, some with pity, others with envy. None ever saw those taken return. The corridors twisted downward through catacombs older than memory, carved when the Imperium was still young. The air tasted of ozone and burnt copper, the residue of centuries of psychic testing. The procession moved past alcoves filled with statues of hooded figures, each one bearing inscriptions that were less names than warnings. At the end of the descent stood an immense gate of black adamantine. Its surface shimmered faintly with containment runes, the kind used to cage nightmares. Beyond it lay the Chamber of Trials. Inside, the light was gold and cold, emanating from a single suspended orb above a circular platform. The air vibrated faintly, as though alive with thought. At the platform's edge waited the examiners, inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus, their faces veiled by masks of mirrored steel. Around them stood Psyker masters of the Adeptus Mechanicus, robed in deep crimson, their eyes milky white from centuries of sanctioned use. Between them, a servo skull hovered silently, its vox grill crackling as it recorded every breath, every tremor. The boy was placed at the center of the platform, the restraints removed, but replaced by invisible psychic tethers that held him immobile. One of the Inquisitors spoke, her voice soft yet absolute. "You stand before the will of the Emperor. Your mind will be opened, measured, and judged. If he finds you worthy, you shall serve. If not, your soul will be returned to the light of his throne." It was not a threat. It was a promise. The trial began with silence. Then came the probing, an invisible hand pushing against his consciousness, prying apart memories like pages in a book. He felt them sift through his life. His mother's face, the smell of oil and smoke from his homeworld, the sound of his own cries as the black ship took him. Each image was examined, then discarded. When they reached his dreams, he felt them hesitate. The image of the golden figure, the plain of ash, the whispers in the light. These they lingered on. A murmur passed between the examiners. The pressure increased. The boy screamed as his vision fractured, the chamber dissolving into a kaleidoscope of color and flame. Voices echoed from the walls, thousands of them, screaming, laughing, chanting in languages that defied comprehension. He saw shapes in the corners of his mind, vast and hungry, pressing against the thin barrier of his sanity. One of the Psyker masters began to chant a binding litany, his voice rising above the din. The sigils on the walls ignited, flooding the room with white fire. Something inside him broke, or perhaps something inside him was born. A wave of psychic force erupted from his body, shattering the nearest runes and hurling the attendants to the ground. The custodian stepped forward instantly, halberd raised, but the Inquisitor raised a hand, not in alarm, but in curiosity. When the light faded, the boy knelt in the center of the scorched platform, sobbing, his body smoking from the effort. The Inquisitor approached, her mirrored mask reflecting his trembling face. "He hears the Astronomicon," she said softly. "He dreams of the throne. This one is touched, but not yet taken." Another examiner nodded. "Then he is worthy of sanction." The boy's tears dried in the heat of the chamber. He did not understand what they meant, but deep within him, something else did. A voice whispering, "You belong to us now." He was dragged away, barely conscious, past the rows of cells where others waited for their turn. Some reached out to touch him, their eyes full of desperate hope. He said nothing. Behind him, the chamber of trials was cleansed with holy fire. Tomorrow, more would be tested. He awoke to the smell of burning incense and the soft hum of chanting. His body ached, his mind felt hollow, scraped raw by invisible hands. Around him stood the survivors, a fraction of those who had boarded the black ship. Where there had once been thousands, now there were hundreds, maybe fewer. Each bore the same empty stare, the same trembling reverence, as if they had looked upon something too vast for the mind to hold. They were brought into a great hall that seemed to stretch forever. Columns of stone and steel rose into the dark above, their surfaces etched with prayers so ancient the words had become shapes rather than language. The air vibrated with the weight of thought, not the presence of any one mind, but of 1,000 voices whispering in unison. The survivors were told this place was called the Hall of Souls. It was here that those found worthy would receive the Emperor's gaze. They stood in silence as robed figures of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica moved among them, placing small iron circlets upon their foreheads. Each band bore a single rune that glowed faintly blue. The attendants told them to still their thoughts, to surrender every impulse, every memory, every shred of rebellion. For what came next was not meant for the human mind. The chamber darkened. A low hum built in the air, deep, resonant, like the heartbeat of a god. The iron circlets grew warm. Then, all at once, the world dissolved. There were no walls, no others, only light, endless, blinding, golden light that burned through everything. Flesh, thought, time. The boy tried to scream but had no mouth. He tried to think but had no mind. The light consumed him, yet within it, he felt something vast and sorrowful watching, not as a being of love nor hatred, but of purpose beyond mortal comprehension. He knew, somehow, impossibly, that he stood before the Emperor, not in body, but in essence, and in that instant, every fear, every doubt, every fragment of who he was dissolved. He was a single spark within the endless storm of the Astronomicon. He saw ships threading through the void, guided by that eternal flame. He saw the warp itself recoiling, hissing, retreating before that immeasurable presence. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. The boy collapsed, gasping, his skin cold and his eyes streaming blood. Around him, dozens lay motionless, their bodies empty vessels. Others screamed incoherently, their minds shattered by what they had seen. The attendants moved through the carnage with the detachment of surgeons, marking the living, collecting the dead. The survivors were silent, changed. The Inquisitor observed from a raised platform, her mirrored mask reflecting the faint glow of the dying runes. She turned to her aides and spoke only once. "They have seen the Emperor's shadow. The weak are gone. The rest will serve." As they were led away, the boy stumbled, his vision dimming. Somewhere deep within his skull, he felt the echo of that golden presence. Faint, distant, but eternal. It filled him not with hope, but with purpose, cold and absolute. He understood now what sanctioned truly meant. To be sanctioned was not to be freed. It was to be bound forever. And so began the next phase of his transformation, the forging of his will into a weapon the Imperium could trust. The chamber smelled of burning oil and sanctified blood. Deep beneath the halls of terror, where sunlight had not touched in millennia, the survivors of the Black Ship stood in rows, stripped to the waist, their skin pale beneath the flickering glow of lumen torches. The air was thick with the hum of suppressed energy. Every breath tasted of iron. Every heartbeat echoed like a drumbeat before execution. Here, beneath the banners of the Adeptus Telepathica, the newly chosen Psykers were to be bound, not in chains of steel but in litanies, pain, and faith. The only binding strong enough to hold a human mind against the horrors of the warp. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, an arch-mentor of the Telepathica, draped in robes of black and gold, his eyes hidden behind thin layers of leaded glass. In his hands, he held a staff topped with an unlit brazier, its surface carved with 1,000 names, the names of those who had not survived this ritual. His voice, when it came, was slow and resonant, the tone of one who had performed this ceremony countless times. "The soul is a gate," he said, "and gates must be sealed, or they invite the storm." He raised his staff. The attendants began to chant. Ritual knives, dull with use, gleamed in the torchlight as acolytes stepped forward, carving sigils into the Psyker's flesh, runes of warding, each one shaped to hold back a specific corruption. With every incision, the attendants poured sanctified oils into the wounds, the scent filling the air with the sharpness of promethium and incense. The pain was exquisite. Some cried out, others bit their lips until blood ran down their chins. The boy, no longer a child but not yet a man, stood motionless. He had no tears left. When the carving ended, molten wax mixed with his blood as the runes were sealed. The pain became something distant, detached. His mind hovered between exhaustion and transcendence. The Archmentor approached, dipping his fingers into the brazier, which now burned with blue psychic flame. "Repeat after me," he intoned, "for this vow will mark the boundary between what you were and what you will become." The boy's voice was weak, but he spoke as commanded. "By the throne's light I am unmade. By his will I am reforged. My soul is his shield. My pain his weapon. My death his decree." The flame was pressed to his forehead. It did not burn. It seared through his very being, branding his mind with wards invisible to mortal eyes. The world dissolved into sensation, pain and light merging until neither could be told apart. When it was done, he fell to his knees, steam rising from his skin. Around him, others collapsed or screamed. A few never rose again. Their corpses were swiftly removed, their names recorded, their ashes destined for the furnaces that powered the Emperor's golden beacon. The Archmentor turned away, his duty complete. "Those who endure," he said quietly, "are no longer children of man. They are instruments of his will." In that moment, the boy understood the truth that had haunted him since his capture. The Imperium did not save Psykers. It consumed them. Not in cruelty but necessity, humanity's survival demanded their torment. And though he felt hollow, though every nerve in his body screamed, a flicker of pride stirred beneath the despair. He had survived what countless others could not. He was alive, bound, burned, but alive. In the dark, a new voice whispered, faint but clear, a thought not his own, a fragment of something vast and familiar. "Now you serve." The light dimmed, the chanting ceased, and for the first time, he felt the chains within his mind tighten, not to imprison, but to focus. He was ready for the next step in the Emperor's design. The days that followed the ritual of binding were no longer measured in hours, but in endurance. Deep within the Scholastia Psychona, the surviving Psykers were thrust into a cycle of training so relentless, it blurred the boundary between discipline and punishment. Each dawn, if dawn it could be called in the hollow depths beneath Terra, began with the tolling of iron bells that echoed through the stone halls like the heartbeat of the planet itself. They rose in silence, their bodies wrapped in coarse grey robes. The air was always cold, tasting of dust and metal. Servitors lined the corridors, their mechanical limbs dripping sacred oils onto the flagstones, purging the air of corruption with waves of incense. The scent was meant to calm the mind. It did not. The boy learned quickly that here, thought was both weapon and vulnerability. Instructors of the Telepathica, old, withered men and women who had long since burned out their own psychic gifts, prowled the training halls like spectres, their voices carried by vox amplifiers that made them sound more machine than human. Discipline, they intoned, is not the denial of fear. It is the caging of it. Training took many forms. One day they would meditate before hollow simulacra of diamonds, learning to stare into the face of temptation without yielding. The next, they were forced into psychic duels, minds colliding like storms, the air around them crackling with unseen force. Failure was punished with pain, neural whips, psychic feedback, or hours of enforced silence in dark confinement. The boy's scars from the ritual itched with every exertion, the runes burning whenever his concentration wavered. At night, they were allowed a single hour of rest in narrow cells lit by flickering candles. The walls were covered in inscriptions, fragments of the Emperor's Creed etched by countless hands before them. He found comfort tracing the words with his fingers, even when he no longer believed them. There were others he came to know, though none by name. Friendship was discouraged. Attachment led to corruption, or worse, empathy. Still, there were shared glances, quiet nods of endurance. One girl, her eyes gone white from an earlier test, whispered to him once, "We're ghosts already." The only thing left to learn is how to haunt without being seen. Weeks turned into months. Slowly the pain became routine. The voices that had haunted his dreams, the whispers of the warp, faded to distant murmurs. He could feel the lattice of bindings inside his mind now, a network of wards and sigils that hummed whenever his thoughts strayed too far. It was both prison and armor. Then came the true test, the communion trial. Each Psyker was placed alone in a sealed chamber lined with psychic insulation. In the center burned a single candle. The instructor's command was simple: reach out to the flame, not with flesh, but with thought, and feel what lay beyond. The boy sat cross-legged, breathing slowly. The hum of the bindings echoed in his skull. He reached tentatively through the veil of the material into the sea of thought that waited just beyond sight. At first, there was nothing but static. Then, like a whisper carried on smoke, a presence stirred. Not hostile, not kind, simply vast. He saw fragments, stars dying, souls screaming, golden light pulsing like a heartbeat across eternity. For an instant, he felt something brush against his consciousness, something that recognized him, a whisper like the breath of a dying god. Serve well and be remembered. He gasped, the candle extinguishing as if blown out by unseen wind. When the instructors opened the door, they found him shaking, eyes wide with terror and awe. One of them nodded, noting his reaction on a data slate. "He has touched the Astronomicon," she murmured. "He lives. Mark him for sanction." That night he did not sleep. He stared at the walls of his cell, at the endless lines of prayer carved into stone. For the first time, he felt not fear, but belonging. He was a tool now, a weapon forged in faith and fire, and tomorrow he would be branded with the mark of his new purpose. The ceremony took place in the deepest sanctum of the Scholastia Psychona, a chamber known as the Hall of Quiet Souls. No sound from the surface reached this far. The air was dense with incense and the hum of psionic suppression fields. To cross its threshold was to step beyond the world of the living and into one of pure obedience. Rows of robed figures stood upon raised platforms surrounding a circular dais. Above them hung vast banners bearing the sigil of the Imperial Aquila, its twin heads glimmering faintly in the torchlight. The newly proven Psykers, those who had endured the trials, the bindings, and the communion, knelt in a line at the dais's center. Each one trembled, their robes darkened with sweat. None spoke. The boy was among them, His hands rested upon his knees, his body weak but unyielding. He had seen too much to fear pain now. The instructors moved among them, placing small metal circlets upon their foreheads. These were the sanctioning diadems, forged with psychic alloys, etched in prayer by the tech priests of Mars. They were not ornaments. They were seals, the physical manifestation of the Emperor's will upon the minds of those who would serve. The Archmentor returned, bearing a staff crowned with a shard of black crystal that pulsed with faint light. His voice echoed across the chamber. "You stand reborn," he declared. "The flesh that was yours now belongs to the Emperor. Your mind is his conduit, your pain his fuel. Through your suffering, humanity endures." One by one, the Psykers were summoned forward. They knelt before the dais as the Archmentor pressed the staff to their foreheads. When the crystal made contact, light erupted, white, searing, divine. The smell of ozone and burnt flesh filled the air. Some screamed, others fainted. A few simply collapsed, their minds shattered before the ritual could complete. The attendants removed those bodies swiftly, without ceremony. When his turn came, the boy lifted his chin. The Archmentor regarded him for a moment, as if studying the pattern of scars across his face. Then, without a word, he brought the staff down. Pain unlike anything he had ever known consumed him. It was not the pain of the body, but of the soul. A tearing, splitting agony that reached into the deepest folds of his being. His vision fractured into images, stars burning out, planets screaming as they died, a million voices calling the Emperor's name in unison. For an instant, he saw the throne, not with eyes, but with faith. And in that blinding brilliance, he understood his purpose. When he awoke, he was lying upon the cold floor. His robes were singed, his breath ragged. The diadem upon his brow now glowed faintly, its runes etched into his flesh like molten script. Around him, the other survivors stirred weakly. Their eyes shone with the same dim light, proof that their souls had been branded in the Emperor's image. The Archmentor's voice broke the silence. "Rise, sanctioned Psykers of the Imperium. You are his fire-made flesh. You are the last line between mankind and the abyss." The boy rose slowly, his body trembling. Something within him had changed. The whispers that once plagued his mind were gone, replaced by a steady pulse of light, faint but enduring. It was not peace. It was duty, a leash forged from faith and terror. From that day forward, he would no longer be called by name. His identity was irrelevant, his purpose absolute. The administratum would assign him a designation, a number, a function. The man he had been was dead, burned away by the Emperor's flame. When the ceremony ended, they were led away in silence. Some would become astropaths, their eyes to be burned away in the sacred ritual of soul binding. Others would serve the Astra Militarum, channeling the warp's power upon the battlefield. All were expendable. All were necessary. As they passed through the final gate, the boy, now a sanctioned Psyker, looked once more toward the unseen heights of the palace above. He felt the hum of the golden throne in the distance, like a heartbeat beneath the planet's crust. And for the first time, he whispered a prayer. Not to be saved, but to endure. War smells the same across a million worlds. Burnt promethium, blood, and fear. For the newly sanctioned Psyker, there was no ceremony of deployment, no honor guard to mark his service. He was assigned to the 144th Valerian Infantry, a regiment of the Astra Militarum fighting on the shattered world of Rith VII, a planet so scarred by bombardment that even its oceans boiled in their graves. When he arrived, the soldiers stared. Some crossed themselves in the sign of the Aquila, others looked away as if eye contact might invite corruption. Psykers were not comrades, they were liabilities tolerated by necessity. To the regiment, he was not a man but a tool, a weapon wrapped in trembling flesh. The commissar made that clear on the first day. "If he falters," the officer said, tapping the bolt pistol at his side, "I'll do the Emperor's mercy myself." The Psyker nodded without protest. His duty was simple, to wield the warp at the Emperor's command and to die before it consumed him. The front lines stretched beyond the horizon, a wasteland of metal and ruin. The enemy, an Orc warband, had turned the once thriving manufactorum fields into fortresses of rust and smoke. The sky pulsed with green lightning from their crude weapons, and every hour the ground trembled with artillery fire. Amidst the chaos, the Psyker stood beside the command squad, his diadem flickering faintly with blue light, the sigils on his flesh humming with restrained energy. When the order came to advance, he marched in silence. Around him, soldiers shouted prayers and death oaths, their voices swallowed by the roar of lasguns and the scream of ordnance. As the first wave clashed, the air itself seemed to curdle. The warp stirred within him, a presence vast and hungry, pressing against the confines of his mind. He tasted metal on his tongue. His pulse quickened. The commissar's gaze never left him. Then the psychic call came, not spoken, but felt, the commander's plea for intervention. The Psyker stepped forward into the open, raising his trembling hands. The world around him slowed. The warp opened like an unseen wound. For a heartbeat, he felt everything. Every dying scream, every ember of hatred, every flicker of devotion burning across the battlefield. And then he let it out. Flame erupted from his palms, not of fire but of thought, a roaring inferno of azure energy that swept across the Orc lines. Flesh vaporized, armor melted, and the very air screamed as reality bent under the strain. The soldiers behind him cheered, but he heard nothing. All he felt was the warp surging through him, tearing at his mind with the promise of infinite power. His bindings flared, runes searing bright. He dropped to his knees, gasping, smoke rising from his robes. The commissar approached slowly, hand resting on his holster. "Still yourself, witch," he hissed, voice calm but heavy with warning. The Psyker nodded weakly. He had seen what happened to those who lost control. As the smoke cleared, the ruins ahead glowed faintly where the warp had touched them. Shapes writhed within the haze, things not meant for mortal sight. The Psyker turned away before his sanity followed. That night, as the regiment made camp amidst the dead, he sat apart from the others. Soldiers told stories and drank from stolen rations. No one invited him. He stared into the ashes, hearing whispers in the crackling fire. For a moment, he thought they were the same voices from before, the ones from the Black Ship. But no, these were older, darker, and closer. "Every flame leaves a shadow, little spark," a voice murmured in his mind. "And yours burns so brightly." He clenched his fists until the pain drowned the whisper. His diadem hummed, the wards tightening like chains. Above the battlefield, the sky flickered with distant explosions, stars dying one by one. The Emperor's light still reached this forsaken world, but it felt thin, fragile, fading. And as the Psyker drifted into restless sleep, he realized that the war outside was only half the battle. The other half waited within. Dawn came without sunlight. On Rith 7th, the sky never cleared, only shifted from black to bruised grey. The air reeked of ozone and oil. The earth pulsed faintly with the aftertaste of psychic residue. The 144th Valyrian Infantry advanced again, their boots crunching over charred remains and the metallic dust of what used to be men and machines. The Sanctioned Psyker walked among them, head bowed, hands clasped tight. His robes were singed and torn, his face hollow from sleeplessness. The others avoided him, giving a wide berth even in the cramped trenches. They feared him more than the enemy. He did not blame them. He feared himself too. All night the whispers had returned, not demonic, but familiar, the voices of those who had died in his fire. He heard them clearly now, murmuring behind his thoughts, soft and sorrowful. "Why did you burn us?" they asked. "We only wanted to live." He pressed his palms against his temples until his fingernails drew blood, but the whispers remained. The day's orders came down the Vox, an assault on an Orc stronghold built from the carcass of a crashed Imperial cruiser. The regiment's artillery was exhausted, the supply lines cut. Only one weapon remained reliable: him. When the attack began, the world dissolved into noise and flame. The Psyker followed the commissar through the smoke, every breath a prayer. Lasfire streaked through the haze. The Orcs bellowed in challenge, their crude war machines roaring, and somewhere behind the lines, the officer's voice reached his mind, carried not by Vox, but by will. Unleash it. He obeyed. The warp opened inside him like a lungful of fire. His bindings screamed as power surged through the sigils carved into his flesh. The world slowed, colors inverted, sound became pressure. He lifted his hand, and the air rippled outward in concentric waves. Reality buckled. Invisible force slammed into the enemy lines. A shockwave of raw, distilled thought. Orcs were hurled into the air, their armor imploding under impossible weight. Tanks buckled like tin, flames roaring in unnatural silence. The soldiers behind him fell to their knees, shielding their eyes from the blinding flare. For a moment, it worked. Victory seemed within reach. Then the warp screamed back. The recoil hit him like a storm. He staggered, clutching his head as the air around him fractured into veins of blue lightning. The whispers returned, louder now, jubilant, mocking. He saw faces forming in the smoke, the ones he had killed, smiling through the distortion. They reached for him, their mouths open in laughter and prayer alike. "You've opened the door," they sang. "And we are coming through." The Psyker's vision dimmed. Blood streamed from his nose and eyes. The Commissar's voice cut through the chaos. Sharp, commanding. "Contain it! Now!" he tried. "Emperor, forgive him," he tried. He recited the litany of warding, his voice breaking, but the words slipped away. The fire within him grew brighter, burning his nerves, his soul, his sanity. His restraints flared white-hot, melting against his skin. And then, silence. A single gunshot echoed across the battlefield. The Commissar had drawn his bolt pistol, the barrel aimed not to kill, but to remind. "Focus, witch," he growled, "or the Emperor will have you this instant." The Psyker fell to his knees, gasping. The fire dimmed. The warp receded, sulking, whispering promises for later. Around them, the remnants of the enemy line burned. The ground was cratered, steaming. The survivors of the regiment stared at him in reverent terror. None dared speak. He rose slowly, shaking, his diadem cracked but still glowing faintly. "It's contained," he whispered. The Commissar holstered his weapon. "See that it stays that way." That night, the Psyker sat alone again, his thoughts echoing in the hollow space of his mind. Each battle felt like a test, each victory a wound. The fire obeyed him only because he had not yet given it a reason to consume him. He looked at his trembling hands and realized he no longer felt their weight. He could not tell where the power ended and he began. In the distance, the front lines howled under bombardment. The war went on, and deep within the warp, something laughed, patient, hungry, waiting for the next opening. Night fell like a dying breath. The bombardment had ceased, leaving only the groan of cooling metal and the faint whisper of ash carried on the wind. The Psyker sat at the edge of the ruined trench, his back against the shattered hull of a chimera transport, eyes fixed on the horizon. The stars above were faint, veiled by smoke and the shimmering distortion of residual psychic energy. He had unleashed too much. He could feel it still, coiling inside him like an ember that refused to die. His comrades slept uneasily. The Commissar watched him from a distance, bolt pistol resting across his knees. Trust was a fragile thing among soldiers, and with Psykers, it was rarer still. He could feel their fear, not through words or glances, but through the raw hum of thought that always leaked from unguarded minds. They prayed for victory, but more than that, they prayed he would not break, and he was breaking. Each battle gnawed at his sanity, each invocation of power thinning the walls between what was real and what was waiting beyond. He had begun to hear it, the breathing of the warp. Not whispers this time, but a steady rhythmic pulse that matched his own heartbeat. When he closed his eyes, he saw shapes behind the veil, silhouettes of impossible geometry moving through endless storms of light. Sleep brought no peace. That night, he dreamed of the black ship again, the hum of containment fields, the faces of those who never made it to Terra. Only now the corridors were empty. The doors stood open. The lights flickered with a dull red glow. He walked the length of that vessel, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by static. At the far end, where the air shimmered like heat haze, he saw a figure waiting, robed in gold, faceless, immense. "Do you know why you were spared?" it asked, though no mouth moved. He tried to speak, but no words came. "Because you burn slowly," the voice continued, "and the Imperium needs candles that last." The figure raised a hand. Behind it, the warp bled through reality, colors folding into each other like oil on water. The Psyker reached out, compelled, and felt warmth, not from light, but from something deeper, something alive. He woke screaming. The camp was in chaos. Sirens blared, soldiers running toward the perimeter. The Commissar was already barking orders, his voice slicing through the din. "Contact on the northern ridge! They've tunneled through!" The Psyker staggered to his feet, disoriented, his mind still half in the dream. The air was wrong, heavy, vibrating. He could feel it now, a tear forming, faint but growing, somewhere near the trenches. The veil was thinning. Something was pushing through. He ran toward the ridge, his diadem flickering violently. The ground trembled beneath his boots. A scream tore through the night, not human, layered, echoing across frequencies no ear should hear. The soldiers fired blindly into the darkness, but their weapons did nothing. The air itself convulsed. Then he saw it. A shimmer, like a heat mirage, rippling through the air. Within it, a shape writhed, half-formed, seeking purchase in reality. A demon, drawn by the psychic residue of his power. His own mind had called it. The commissar shouted, "Contain it, Psyker, now!" He fell to his knees, pressing his hands into the dirt, chanting the litanies of binding through gritted teeth. The world around him twisted, the warp screaming in defiance. The creature's claws scraped against the edges of existence, tearing sparks from the air. He poured every ounce of will into the runes burned into his skin. They glowed, then flared white-hot. Pain exploded through him, blinding, pure. Light erupted, a dome of psychic fire that scorched the ground and seared the night. The demon howled, its form unraveling into smoke and screams before vanishing entirely. When the light faded, silence returned. He collapsed, trembling. His breath came in shallow gasps. The commissar approached, staring down at him with unreadable eyes. "You held the line," he said. But another second, he didn't finish the thought. The Psyker nodded weakly. He didn't need to. He knew what would have happened. As dawn crept over the ruined landscape, he stared at the horizon again. The sun's light broke through the clouds, dim, filtered, but real. Yet even as warmth touched his face, he felt no comfort, only exhaustion. The veil had held tonight, but it was thinner now, too thin. And somewhere in the depths of his mind, the voice from his dream whispered once more, calm and patient. "Every candle burns. Some just take longer to melt." The war on Rith 7 ended, as all wars in the Imperium did. Without triumph, without mourning, only endurance. The enemy was gone, scoured from the soil by fire and faith, but the ground still whispered. The Psyker felt it with every step, the faint vibration of things that should not remain. The warp had touched this place, and its echo would never fade. He walked among the wreckage of the battlefield, his boots crunching on glass and bone. The soldiers were silent now, too exhausted for prayer. Even the commissar kept his voice low, as though words themselves might stir the ashes. In the distance, the sun struggled to rise, its light distorted by the fumes. For the first time, he wondered whether the Emperor's gaze could still pierce skies like these. That night, as the regiment set camp for evacuation, he sat alone near the remnants of a shrine, a crude effigy of the Aquila, half melted by bombardment. He closed his eyes and listened. The warp was quiet but not empty. Beneath the stillness, he could hear them again. The voices of the fallen, soft and hollow, drifting through the void between thought and reality. They did not accuse him now. They sang. It was not a song of sorrow, but of remembrance. Faint harmonies carried across the immaterial. Threads of emotion without words. Every soul he had touched in battle, every life ended by his fire, lingered there. He could feel them brushing against the edges of his mind, like waves on the shore of consciousness. He should have been afraid. Instead, he felt peace. And then, beneath that peace, something else stirred. A deeper resonance, one that hummed in rhythm with the very core of his being. He had felt it once before, long ago, on Terra, when the Emperor's light had burned through his soul. But now, it was different. Fainter, older. The golden warmth was gone, replaced by something colder, a flicker struggling against the dark. A vision overtook him. The battlefield dissolved into endless black. Stars hung above like dying embers. In their midst, he saw the golden throne, not as a seat of power, but as a tomb, vast and decaying. The Emperor's light pulsed faintly, dimmer than he remembered. The warp pressed closer, feeding, hungering, and beneath it all, he felt the same whisper he had carried since his sanctioning. The voice that had called him Candle. "Weapon servant, the fire wanes. Child," it murmured, its tone both tender and cruel. "And still, we burn," he gasped, the vision breaking. Around him, the air shimmered. His diadem glowed with sudden light, the runes thrumming as they absorbed the psychic surge. The soldiers nearby turned in alarm, crossing themselves, whispering prayers. He steadied his breath, forcing the energy back into silence. but he could not shake what he had seen. The Emperor's light, the beacon that guided humanity through the warp, was faltering. He did not know how he knew it, only that he did. Perhaps it was blasphemy, perhaps it was revelation, but in that knowing, he understood the truth of his existence. The Psyker's curse was not only to fight demons, nor to bear the burden of madness. His true purpose was to feed the flame. Every sanctioned soul, every bound mind, every death in service, all were sacrifices. The Emperor's fire burned not on devotion alone, but on the endless stream of lives given to sustain him. And when his time came, his light too would be added to that inferno. He looked once more at the broken sky, the faint trace of dawn bleeding through the smoke, and whispered a single prayer, not for salvation, but for the strength to keep burning a little longer. By your will, I endure. The evacuation order came at dawn. The war on Rith 7 was finished, but the victory meant nothing. The Imperium did not win wars. It simply survived them. The surviving regiments gathered in silence near the extraction fields, the wind dragging ash across their faces. The Psyker stood apart, his gaze fixed on the flickering glow of the sky. The warp felt restless today, a quiet pressure building beneath the veil, as if reality itself were holding its breath. The astropathic relay had fallen days before, its operators torn apart by a psychic storm that no one could explain. Now, without communication, the extraction fleet hovered blind above the atmosphere. The regiment's command officers argued over Vox channels, their voices sharp with fatigue. But amidst the chaos, one truth settled in. Someone had to re-establish contact. Only one man among them could. The Psyker approached without waiting to be summoned. His robes hung in tatters, the sigils carved into his flesh faintly aglow. The commissar turned toward him, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. "You're in no condition to act," he said flatly. "I can reach them," the Psyker replied, his voice steady but hollow. "But it will cost." The officer studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then pay it. The Emperor protects." The relay tower loomed at the edge of the camp, a jagged ruin of twisted metal and shattered glass. The air around it shimmered faintly with residual energy. He could feel the warp bleeding through the cracks in the structure, drawn to the scent of suffering like flies to rot. Each step toward it was agony, each breath a reminder of what he carried inside him. He reached the base of the tower and began the rites of activation. His lips moved in silent prayer, the litanies drilled into him since terror. His voice rose, barely audible over the wind, the words old and heavy. "By his flame, I reach beyond. By his will, I bridge the void. Let my voice serve as beacon until I am no more." He pressed his bloodied palms against the tower's surface. The diadem on his forehead ignited with light. For an instant, the world vanished. He stood in the warp, not as dream or illusion, but truly. The sea of madness stretched in all directions, waves of color and sound crashing into infinity. The screams of 1,000 souls echoed across its expanse. But within that storm, a faint path shimmered, a thread of golden light reaching upward, impossibly far. He grasped it with what remained of his strength and sent his thoughts along it, shaping words from will alone. "This is the 144th Valerian Infantry. Rith 7 secured, requesting extraction." For the Emperor, the message carried, rippling through the immaterial. He felt it echo outward, felt the beacon of the Astronomicon flicker in response. Faint, but present. The connection held. Relief washed over him for a heartbeat. And then something answered, not from the light. From below, a chorus of whispers swelled, familiar and cruel. The same voices that had haunted him since his first awakening. They sang in harmony, their tone almost tender. "You've served well, little candle, but every light must feed the flame." The golden thread trembled. The warp surged upward, hungry and alive. The Psyker screamed, forcing every ounce of his will into the connection. He pushed the message through one final time, felt it reach the fleet, and then he let go. From orbit, the fleet's astropaths received the transmission moments before the signal flared into oblivion. On the surface, the relay tower erupted in blinding light. Soldiers fell to their knees, shielding their eyes as a pillar of azure fire tore skyward, piercing the clouds. For an instant, it was beautiful, a single spark defying the void. When the light faded, only ashes remained. The commissar stood among the stunned survivors. He removed his cap and bowed his head. He did his duty. he murmured. In the quiet that followed, the Vox crackled to life. The fleet had received the signal. Extraction was inbound. The Psyker's body was gone, but the air where he had stood shimmered faintly, as though his final act had burned his image into the world. Some swore they could still hear a whisper, faint, calm, carried on the wind. By his will, I endure. The fleet's thunder rolled across the sky as the extraction ships descended, fire trailing their hulls like the wings of descending angels. The soldiers of the 144th looked up, awed and silent, as the first dropships landed amid the smoking ruins. But even as they boarded, their victory tasted hollow. Every step into the transport bays felt heavier than triumph should. No one spoke of the Psyker who had bought their survival. The commissar lingered on the surface until the last man had departed. He stood before the blackened circle where the relay once stood, where the Psyker had burned himself into nothingness. The ground was glassy beneath his boots, smooth as if seared by celestial fire. When he knelt, the faint hum of residual energy trembled through his gloves. It was not cold, nor warm, only eternal. "The Emperor protects," he whispered, as if to remind himself that such protection had a cost. Above the clouds, the void was serene. The fleet maneuvered in silence, preparing for warp translation. In the astropathic choir chambers, the bound seers stirred uneasily. One of them, her eyes long since burned away, raised her head. "A light has joined the throne," she murmured. A candle extinguished, yet burning still. The others nodded, for they had felt it too. The faint tremor through the Astronomicon, a ripple of new energy feeding the eternal flame. On Terra, somewhere in the infinite machinery that sustained the Golden Throne, a flicker of brightness surged, microscopic, insignificant to most, but to those attuned to the warp, unmistakable. Another soul had been received, another servant returned home. The Psyker did not awaken as a man, for there was nothing left of him to awaken, but in the endless currents of the warp, his consciousness lingered like an afterimage. He felt neither pain nor fear, only light, vast and distant. He drifted toward it instinctively, drawn by something beyond memory. The whispers that had once haunted him were gone now, replaced by a single voice, strong and resonant, echoing through eternity. "You endured." He did not answer. He had no tongue, no thought, only the fading awareness of what he had been. And because you endured, mankind endures. The light enveloped him. There was no judgment, no absolution, only purpose. In that final instant, he understood. All Psykers, all the tormented souls who had borne the Emperor's burden, were not forgotten. They were the fuel of divinity, the unending sacrifice that kept the throne alive. Each flame fed the next. A chain of suffering stretching back 10,000 years. To the Imperium, their deaths were statistics. To the warp, they were songs. And perhaps, somewhere within that infinite radiance, the Emperor remembered their names. Back aboard the ship, the commissar stood at the viewing deck, watching Rith 7 recede into shadow. He whispered a prayer, not from the catechism of the ecclesiarchy, but something simpler, older, the kind of prayer a soldier says when he has nothing left to believe in but duty. For every candle that burns, another must be lit, he bowed his head. The stars stretched into lines as the fleet entered the warp, vanishing into the sea of unreality, guided by the faint, eternal light of the Emperor's will. Far away, in that unreachable brilliance, a new flicker joined the storm. And though no mortal would ever know his name, the sanctioned Psyker burned on, one more spark in the Emperor's mercy.